also announce and clarify that the birthday party is 6 days from now, January 19th.
Not September. September. I heard it too. Good evening. Hello. It's been a while. It's been almost 3 years, actually. You look good. Hardly changed at all. 3 years. Seems like a long time, seems like not much time at all. A lot has changed for us in our lives. I'm sure a lot has changed in your life. I don't know how many of you recall that when I spoke last time, 3 years ago, I shared that we were beginning the adoption process and that I wanted you to be praying for that. So that was, April, I think, 3 years ago. By the end of that year, we had finished all the paperwork. By the beginning of January, we were on the list, and they said, you can expect to wait 6 months, 12 months, 2 years. You guys are overseas. That might mean longer. So now you just wait. That was January, I think, 11th. We got a call on February 14th saying there was a baby already there waiting for us. Do we want him? And so within 2 days, we were off. We were in Ukraine. We had to fly to the States, and we adopted our baby boy. He was born February 7th, and this is him today. He's adorable. It's been a ride. We wanted to be parents for so long, and now we are parents, and it's been beautiful, and it's been beautiful watching my wife be the mother I knew she would be, and it's been an adventure. This is our first furlough tripping around with a baby. I do not recommend that. He's an expert traveler, though, and really it does a great job. So over the last 2 years, our lives have been flipped upside down with becoming parents, our family life, but also our ministry has changed quite a bit too, and our ministry is changing. And so I want to share some of what's been happening. After nearly 8 years in Kharkov, the city we've lived in, we moved away a month ago. We're done with that ministry, and I will tell you more about that as we get there. So as I was thinking about what do I share, what could be encouraging, what would be informative to you, I thought I would tell you the story. I thought I'd tell you the whole story of our congregation, the history, every day, every detail. We're going to be here a while. No, I want to encourage you with the big story, because what I've realized is that when you're stuck in the day-to-day, you don't notice the growth, you don't notice the good things that often. You're so in a rut with everything going on that when you stop and look back, you remember how great God is. And this church has been partnering with us for 8+ years now, and so this story is a part of your story, and I want to share that story with you. I know these infrequent visits of ours can make it hard to remember who we are, what we're doing, where we are, so this will just be a great refresher course for everyone. In 2006, 3 American families decided they were going to go to Russia, to Moscow, Russia, actually. This was before we were a part of the team, and this is before the team was in Ukraine. Our church from the outside kind of looks like an accident. Wasn't supposed to happen. But I think that's how some of God's best stories begin. So these 3 families, most everyone studied through Sunset, decided we're going to go to Russia. 2007, Putin said, I don't want you to come to Russia. They changed the law that made it really difficult for missionaries to stay long-term in the country. And after looking at every avenue to get around that or work with it, they decided they needed to find somewhere else. And since there was a passion for the Russian language among the team and the Slavic people, Ukraine was next best choice. They toured some cities and decided on the city of Kharkov, right there, real close to Russia, so it was practically the same thing. Little did we know what was coming a few years later. They chose Kharkov. It's the second largest city. It's a beautiful city. We love that city. In 2008, they finally moved there 10 years ago, just a little over 10 years ago, and their goal was to plant house churches. They wanted to plant tiny house churches all over the city. They could be self-sustained, self-supportive, and it would be this great movement in the city. Early on, they met another one of the congregations that was already in the city, on the very edge of the city, had a great relationship with them, and so they would sometimes visit them early in the morning, on Sunday mornings, drive out to where they were. And at this time, right after they got there, they had decided to invite us to join their team. They saw the need for a fourth family, and they invited us. We knew most of them through the AIM program and our studies at Sunset. And so we thought about it, prayed about it, came to visit even, and finally decided we're going to do it, but we didn't get there until 2 years later. It took 2 years to finally get there and be all together. So there we are after we arrived in February. This is not February in Ukraine. This was a few months later. That was our team. So what we did at the beginning was whatever we could do. We were people with really no contacts, didn't know anybody, and so you just do what you can do. They hosted a seminar, a creation seminar. One of the teammates' fathers, professor at Lubbock Christian, he came over. It was a big deal, invited lots of people, and then there was a snowstorm, and almost nobody came. We, as Americans, as foreigners, call a lot of attention to ourselves, and so we use that as a way to reach out, share our holidays, traditions. Halloween there, carving pumpkins with people, thought it was awesome. And just do what we can do. We found in a hospital an abandoned children's ward. This is for babies who were abandoned at birth. Mothers said they didn't want their children, or they were taken away for some reason, and before they were put into an orphanage, they spent time here. And we would go and just spend time with the babies. We started meeting once a month in sort of an area-wide thing with that other congregation. And as time went on, there was growth, there were baptisms. This is Julia, and it was good. But a lot of those early baptisms too, you're excited that they happened, but then, nothing came of it. They disappeared, and it was slow going. In the summer of 2011, we welcomed an AIM team. And they brought a great energy to our group, to our church. Also were involved in a lot of English-based things, Let's Start Talking and those kind of things. And they were a great group to have, and they stayed with us for 18 months. We lived in a college town, and New Year's is a big deal in Ukraine. It's kind of like Christmas and New Year's all wrapped up into one. And it's a family holiday, and we knew a lot of students were there, and they didn't have family to go home to or be with that during the holiday. And so we started what ended up becoming a tradition of celebrating New Year's at our house until we couldn't do it anymore, until there were too many people. So we just did what we could do. And it was frustrating, it was exciting, it was frustrating, it was trying a lot of things, it was failing. I heard once somebody say the first 5 years of mission work don't count. And when I was in that first 5 years, it was kind of offensive. I didn't like to hear that. But when I hit year 6, it made sense. Where it's not that stuff didn't count or amount to anything, but it's you learning the culture, it's the culture adapting to you, it's figuring out how things go, what the people are like, and trying to figure out what you are doing, what your passion is as a person, as a group, as a team. And a lot of it was real difficult because we weren't an official registered congregation. And so we'd want to go volunteer or do something somewhere, and we had nothing to show for it. We couldn't go work in schools or anything like that because we weren't anybody. And so it was a lot of dead ends in our creativity of how to get involved. But about a year after we arrived, we stopped the house churches. The dream, the whole goal, scrapped it. Because one of the families was really feeling drawn to it because in the culture in Ukraine, your house is not a place you welcome a lot of strange people. First of all, they're small. The houses are very small, so you're not going to get very many people. But you don't invite strangers to your home, and it's such a part of the culture that strangers don't want to go to a strange home. It's both sides. And so a lot of the Ukrainians would say, why aren't we meeting all together? Why aren't we trying to do this together? At that point, we had 2 house churches going, and we just finally decided, you know what, let's try it. And so we started meeting all together. We rented a place on Sundays just by the hour, and then we met throughout the week doing other things. We hosted several LST teams, Let's Start Talking, studying English using the Bible. Those were very good, exciting, but at the same time, it was people coming just because they wanted to improve their English. And so though it was great to make contacts with people, it felt like we were doing the same thing over and over again. I'm an American, I speak English, and then we were just seeing the same results over and over again. When that stopped, people disappeared. We started hosting an English worship service in our home for a while because we knew a lot of native English-speaking foreign students that were in our city. And then at the time, we had a large team of 4 families, plus we had our 5 AIM students. We had a lot of English, and so we started meeting on like an extra worship time. These are 2 Ukrainians. They're not actually, they're Africans. Didn't imagine that work in Ukraine with Ukrainians meant this. These guys are from Nigeria, and these 2 in particular, the Church of Christ in Nigeria, they were looking for churches and ways to get involved, and so we ended up doing a lot of things with them through the years, and because they were students, we had sort of this in and out of students coming in looking for churches, and in our church we would always translate things into English, and so we had a ministry to the Africans and other foreign students. Because we had so many students, we would do a lot of things on the weekends, game days, stuff outside, trying to meet people, trying to have fun. Our area-wide things continued. Things moved along. We met an English teacher in a school right near our house, and she said, why don't you come and tell our kids, I don't know if it was about Halloween or about Valentine's Day first, come as Americans, come tell the kids about this American holiday. And so we did that, and she liked it so much, she invited us for another holiday, and then after that, she invited us to come weekly to do a little English class, and we thought, this is fantastic. And then we hit the end of the school year, and they said, you can't come back next year because you're nobody, and if parents don't like knowing that there's these people with no credentials or anything teaching their kids at school, it could cause a lot of headache for the school. And we said, how about if we go through some teaching English second language courses, then we can come in. And the teacher said, that would be fantastic. So we worked really hard to do that. And at the beginning of the next school year, we came in and we said, we did it, we're ready. She said, that's nice, but you can't come right now. Because there's this audit going on in the school system. They're being real particular about what's going on in the school, so now's not a good time. And so we, put in all that effort into doing that, and we've never used it since. There were some ladies' things that happened. This is a ladies' seminar that they did. Invited some other Christian ladies even from outside of town. But by mid-2012, this was our average group. There are a ton of Americans in this picture. And by this time, the first family on our team decided it was time for them to leave. So we were down to 3 families, our AIM students, and a slowly growing group of Ukrainians. That continued through most of 2013, just doing the things we were doing. We ended up having the Lubbock Christian University Choir come through Ukraine, and they made our city a stop. It was this big evangelism opportunity, inviting people to come. It was really great. Didn't really see anything come from that, but it was really great. And then November happened. Everything was going on like normal. Beginning of November, one of the families on the team went to the States to have their 4th baby. And we're going to come, right back after all that was done. And then towards the end of November, the president decided he was actually not going to do what he promised and not sign an agreement to align Ukraine more with Europe and away from Russia, like a lot of Ukraine was really supportive of. And when he changed his mind, this happened. Hundreds of thousands of people flocked to the center of Kyiv. It became this protest like no other. Everybody was shocked with how big it was. But this was the end of November, the beginning of winter, And there was no sense that this was going to continue. People said, this will be all done by New Year's. Like, people are going to be cold, they're going to want to go home. It's a very fatalistic point of view that many Ukrainians have, that just, what's the point? It's not gonna work out anyway. But they didn't go home. And that was around the time that Ukraine started to get some news time here on the TV. So that continued through the new year, and then in 2014, some strange soldiers appeared in Crimea, the southernmost part of Ukraine. No markings, not responding when people asked, where are you from, who are you with? Just soldiers walking around taking over things. And then all of a sudden, they chopped off the bottom part of Ukraine, and it's now Russia, annexed to Russia. And so in just a matter of weeks, we lost a part of the country. Things were getting crazy. Then in March, I think it was March, the protests turned violent. Everybody believed the president ordered special forces to fire on the protesters, and over a course of 2 or 3 days, 100 people were killed, which did not stop the protests. It only ignited everything. There's a great documentary on Netflix about this. I keep meaning to look up the actual title. I think it's called Winter on Fire. It's very biased, but it's according to what I believe, so I think it's an excellent documentary. But it was an unreal time. People were traveling to Kyiv to participate in this from all over Ukraine. And as this turned into a mini war, all of a sudden conflict was happening around eastern Ukraine, including where we were. Not conflict, but provocation. Seeing if maybe the same thing that happened in Crimea would happen to these other regions. Thankfully, Kharkov pushed away, said we don't want any part of that, but we lost 2 other provinces that declared themselves independent republics and still are to this day. And so a big chunk was taken out of eastern Ukraine as well. So Ukrainians were scared. We were a little concerned about what the future was going to be. And people were leaving. And around this time, the Heinemans, who had left to have a baby, were waiting it out in the States to see what would happen. Our teammate Denise joked that we can't get to church on time as a family, so if we have to get out of the country fast, I don't know if that's going to happen. So they're waiting to see what was going to happen, and everybody thought this can't last much longer. Our teammates, David and Olivia Nelson, left for a pre-planned trip, and so all of a sudden, Katie and I were there alone, and people in our church were kind of disappearing, and so about that time, this was our core group. The size we had kept going down. Our small church was getting smaller. And as the story seemed to get worse and worse, God was doing something in Ukraine no one really expected. And he was doing something in our church that no one was expecting. For years at this point, we had been a church that was just trying to call people in. We were doing English activities, sort of seeker-focused things. And now, all of a sudden, we were a receiving church. People were coming to us because they were leaving. They were fleeing their homes in eastern Ukraine, and we were the closest big city nearby. We were receiving Christians who were, being transplanted against their will, and then we were receiving people who just needed help, needed a church. And for the first time, I think, in our church's history, we were starting to really, as a group, look outside of ourselves. What can we do for the people and what's going on around us? So right as we were getting to this point, our teammates decided they weren't coming back. And so for real, Katie and I were going to be there by ourselves. And I was trying to get in the mindset of what's this going to be, how is this going to look, still feeling kind of useless in being able to reach out to people because we still were an unofficial, unregistered church, and I was a foreigner, so it's harder to find those points. And about that time, the other church that was meeting in the edge of this city said, why are we doing this separately? Let's get together. And at that time, they were down to 3 members, 2 guys and a girl. And so we started meeting together, and that brought the gift of their official church-registered entity, which gave us a bit of more legal opportunity. And then we said goodbye to our final teammates, and I was ready in the mindset of being kind of alone as the full-time church worker, God sent a friend. God sent Sasha and his wife Nastya Nikolayenko and their little girl Mia. I've spoken about them before. Sasha is one of my best friends in the whole world. I met him when I was an Ames student, and he was 10 years old. And I had the privilege to baptize him a couple years later. We've worked together off and on, and he now is a minister himself. He works with a humanitarian aid group. He and his wife lived in Donetsk, and then Donetsk went crazy and turned into a mini conflict area, and now it's not even part of Ukraine. And so they got out, and they didn't know where they were going to go. And their whole organization kind of just dispersed around Ukraine. And as they got to where they were going, they instantly were getting phone calls about people they could help. Because people were calling this organization, and the organization knew where everybody was in these different cities. And so they came to stay with us for a short while they thought about what they were going to do. And the day he got there, he was getting phone calls about meeting people at a train station, trying to help them. And all of a sudden, our church had a new ministry and a new minister. This is a place we rented to be our humanitarian aid center where we could store clothes and different things to help people. It actually says Internet Cafe above that we took over, and people would keep coming and saying, "Hey, where's the Internet Cafe?" Said, "There's no internet here." One of the first things we did was people fled in the summer with the clothes on their back, thinking we'll be back in a few weeks when this crazy thing dies down. It didn't. So we're getting into fall now. People are renting office spaces, sleeping on the floor, sleeping in apartments or in houses outside the city with no heating, and it was getting cold. And so we started buying these blankets for people because they produce them in our city. We could get them for cheap. We even shipped them to different cities in Ukraine. Sasha started getting calls all the time from people asking for help. How can we help? We'd buy people groceries. And he was on the phone all the time, every day. And one day he decided to take a break, turn off his phone. At the end of the day, he had, I think, 90-something missed calls from people just saying, "Do you have anything to help us?" So we started distributing blankets. We started collecting clothes, as you see in the background there. And our church even got together and cooked some. There was a station at the train station, an area at the train station where people were coming in. Literally, they just got on a train to get out and had nowhere to go, and they were living at the train station. And so there was this organization that had started there that was just helping people there, and our church cooked for them, I think a couple times, took food down to them. Again, it was unifying us in a way that was outside of ourselves that we hadn't experienced before. We rented an apartment specifically for friends or friends of friends that were coming into town that didn't know where to go. It was more of a long-term way to help people who were trying to figure out where to go. This is in the living room with some people that became very dear friends through all of this. We got in contact with a camp called Ramashka. It was outside of Kharkiv. The old Soviet camp had been closed down for years. Some private owners came in, bought it, and they were going to turn it into a summer camp. And right as they did, this conflict began, and they started having people come and stay in their camp, which was great in the summer. But it was a summer camp. There was no heating whatsoever. It was not insulated in any way, and it was super old and dilapidated. And we learned about a lot of people staying there. We took some blankets out there, and through that, we were able to start leading Bible classes with the kids and getting to know their families. And we started a weekly Bible class. This is in the winter. There was no heating. We had a tiny little electric heater in the room, and we would go in, and the kids would be there all bundled up, and we'd be bundled up, and we would do Bible class with the kids. So in 2015, our church was growing, and it was growing because of the conflict, because of the problems. And about early 2015, this was our church. We were growing, and people were being encouraged by what we were doing, and it was pushing us in ways that we hadn't been pushed before. Because of that relationship with the camp, Sasha's organization that he worked with hosted a summer camp with those refugee kids. And when I say refugee, I'm talking about Eastern Ukrainians, internally displaced people, not refugees from other countries. So these kids were living there. Most of them were not going to school. They're just hanging out, and so they decided to do a camp for these kids. And we did that. Our church participated in some of it. It went all summer long. It was madness, but it was good. And about this time, this baby girl was born. This is baby Slava. This is Sasha and Nastya's second daughter. 7 months after this picture was taken, they discovered she had a tumor in her brain. You may remember this. Those of you maybe are on our prayer update list. We raised somewhere near $50,000 to be able to get them to Turkey and have the tumor removed. It was a terrible time in their lives, understandably. It was a terrible time in our lives, as this is the closest I've ever been to something like that. And the world reacted to Slava's need, and they got the money, and she is doing fantastic. She's now about 3.5 years old. She's very 3.5 years old. This is her a few weeks ago. She's talking, she's walking, she's running, she's getting offended, bothering her sister. She's doing great. She has a little cyst in the spot where the tumor was, and they keep watching that, but it's not getting worse, and they've actually seen some improvement in it. And they say one day we'll probably have to remove it, but every time we check, everything's fine. And so she's now on a yearly MRI check because they say she's doing so great, there's no need to do more. So huge blessing. Praise God, especially for those of you here that prayed about her or even maybe participated. Thank you so much. So the camp happened. Our humanitarian aid work was happening. It was in a weird part of the city. We'd invite people to come to our church on Sundays, but it was in a different place, and it was complicated to get to because it wasn't our building. And Sasha just met all these kids through the camp, and we thought we really need a place. And we had a lot of funds coming in helping with this, and so we decided to get a place of our own. We found it in the center of the city. It's fantastic. And it's not very big, but this was our new church building. And in fact, we got it because we had real need for it. And so, depending on who you asked, it was the church building, it was the youth club, or it was the humanitarian aid center. People would be on the phone. They're like, I'm at the center, or I'm at the building, I'm at the church, or the youth club. It had different names, and I loved that. I loved that it was just this tool that we had. So we started having refugees come to our building and receive their help there. This was one of the mornings at the beginning where there's tons of people coming in, waiting to get some help. The youth club began. Sasha wanted to keep in contact with those kids on a weekly basis, give them a place to go, to be in a positive environment and learn positive things. That started up and is still going today. These two boys on the left, this is Andre and Sasha up there. They were there from the very beginning, from camp. And I took this picture just, I guess, a month and a half ago, where they are today. We've known them for over 3 years now. It has been fun to watch them grow up. Sasha's really close with them. Sasha and I had a kind of young men's group that we did with them and another guy, and they are now involved with church activities. They don't just come to the youth thing. They come on Sundays, and Andre, the one on the right, is actually dating one of the younger students at the Ukrainian Bible Institute now. He's not a Christian yet, but man, it's just exciting, and it's been awesome to be a part of their lives. So that brings us to 2016, 2017, and basically we just kept going the way we were going. Our primary work continued to be refugee work. The church continued to grow slowly but surely. We would get shipments in from the States with jackets, clothes, shoes, sometimes with like one shoe, not the other shoe. I don't know how that happened. These three ladies were an important part of the work. As I said, Sasha was getting tons of phone calls and things like that, and they came in and started doing administration stuff, working specifically, the lady on the left starting a women's ministry with some of the refugees, and the lady in the middle, her name is Galina. She is Justice's Ukrainian grandma. We miss her terribly, and just she misses us. We would have Bible studies with the refugee people that came for help. We'd say, stay around if you want afterwards, and we'll read the Bible together. This is one of our Wednesday night services during the summer. Just the core group kept growing. This is a picture which represents probably the most important ministry we ever had in the 8 years we were in Kharkov, cooking class. Katie would host cooking class once a month. They'd come, they would bake something sweet usually, which is not something Ukrainians generally, they don't bake a lot at home. Usually you just go somewhere and buy cookies or something for an event. So Katie would make amazing food. This was always our most attended, highest rated events that went on, and you never had to worry, was there going to be anybody there or not? Through all this work, we came in contact with people who eventually said, I'm glad the war came to Ukraine, otherwise I wouldn't have known the church, otherwise I wouldn't have known Christ. This lady wanted to wear something white for her baptism because it should be something pure and nice, and so she found a doctor's coat, and it still had the logo on the side. There were more baptisms in these couple of years than we had had all the years prior. Good people who are good friends doing good things now. And as of the beginning of 2018, this was our core group. This was celebrating New Year's. But things change. Every September, I teach, I'm sorry, that picture I think was 2017. I teach at the Ukrainian Bible Institute. One class. I've done that now for 5 years. And we were in Kyiv teaching. I was teaching, and the director invited me into his office, and he said, I would love if you and Katie would move to Kyiv and you guys could work with the school in a full-time way, teaching and just helping the school. And I thought, nope, thanks. But the more we thought about it, the more we prayed about it, the more we were seeking advice from friends and family, the more everybody kept encouraging us, saying, this sounds exactly like you, and this sounds exactly like what would be great. We were really nervous about telling Sasha and Nastya because they came to us 4 years ago, and they were being invited to go to Kyiv to work with their main organization. We begged them, saying, don't go to Kyiv, stay in Kharkov. And then 4 years later, I get an invitation, and we're telling them to stay in Kharkov, we're going to Kyiv. So we were nervous to tell them about this opportunity. We were going to ask them, what do you think about it? And their response was positive. They said, we don't want you to go, but. And so we kind of left that a couple weeks, and I got back with Sasha, and I said, so what thoughts have you had on this? And he said, I think you being there could be good for the school, and it could be good for Ukraine, for Christianity in Ukraine as a whole. Just the different dynamic, of multiplying yourself and that kind of thing. And for him to say that meant the world to me. And so in the beginning of 2018, we made the final decision that we would leave at the end of the year. And that was really hard to do, but we felt like it was probably time for us and a good fit for now that we are a family and how the schedule would work and being able to come back and visit to the States. And a good time for the church, a time for them to shed all of their Americans and to see how life was going to go, how God was going to lead the church, whether or not we were there. So 2018 was a year of transition. Work was changing. We transitioned from our humanitarian aid work. The need just wasn't there anymore, and so we were closing that down. And at the same time, we wanted to bring another Ukrainian family to come work in a full-time way with the church. And we asked the Institute, what students would you recommend? And everybody recommended this guy, Bogdan, and that's his wife, Olya, and their son, Karen. And they have another one on the way, a little baby on the way. These guys both of them are evangelists. They are the kind of people who go out into the street, don't meet a stranger, are not shy about their faith, And that really filled a hole I think we've had in our church for a long time. Just didn't have that kind of personality. And they both actually have spent time in prison, and they both are so passionate for prison ministry and those who are down and out and need help. And they hit the ground running, and they arrived in June, and they have been fantastic. These are pictures from the last couple of weeks. Every Saturday, rain or shine or snow or sub-zero temperatures, they go out with a table. There's some free Christian literature, get a group from the church to go with them, and they pass out things, get to know people, invite them to the church. They're serious, and they're a good family. So we left Kharkov on December 12th, and the month leading up to it was exhausting. Anybody who's moved, it's exhausting on multiple levels. Saying goodbye. These are some of Katie's favorite market people she's gone to for years and years now at the market down the street from our house. Saying goodbye, packing up, visiting immigration, making sure we are leaving correctly, potty training. It was like, this move's too easy. Let's start potty training too. And so we were approaching December 12th, and I was supposed to speak. And what do you say? What's your last message? What's the thing you say? Well, if you don't remember anything else I've said, remember this. And I decided to tell them this story. I decided to tell them the story of our church. Many of them didn't know it, and those who knew it didn't know all of it. I wanted them to know our history, all the twists and turns and surprises, and I shared with them that it's important to remember where we've come from and what God has done. I shared the story of Ebenezer. I shared about how in the Old Testament it was very common, we actually talked about this morning, very common when something important happened to set up a stone or an altar or something physical that would be a reminder of the spiritual reality that had just happened. We talked about Ebenezer in 1 Samuel 7. Don't read that yet. I'm still talking. 1 Samuel 7, where the Israelites had not been faithful to God, and God gave them over to their enemies in a terrible defeat. When they realized their mistake and they repented, God gave them victory over their enemies, and Samuel marks the occasion. And it says, and then Samuel took a stone and he stood it in the place between Mizpah and Shen, and he called it Ebenezer, saying, to this place God has helped us. To this moment, God has helped us. Ebenezer, the word, means stone of help. And so he laid down this stone that became this marker that people could say, what happened here? And you would say, this is when God helped us. God helped us to this point. And we wanted to leave them with something that would say the same thing. Some people express, what are we supposed to do when you guys leave? How are we going to move on? Is the church going to fall apart without you? And we wanted to remind them that no, and this never relied on us, and if it ever relies on a person, it's not going to survive. And so we wanted to leave them with a physical reminder that to this point, these 10 years, God has brought us this far. And so we know that he's going to stay with us. It's a reminder, and I don't think we do that enough. I don't think we have enough physical reminders of spiritual realities today. So we came up with the idea to do something we should have done 10 years ago, to have a little communion table built and a podium built. This young man here built it. He is an orphan who is part of a transitional living center that helps orphans learn skills and get on their feet and get prepared for life, the life ahead of them. And I talked to the guy who runs it, and he was like, Andre would love to do this. And he did a fantastic job and, of course, added a little bit more meaning to the gift as a whole. And I told the church, whenever you're spacing out on a Sunday, the guy's praying too long, talking too long, whatever, I want you to be able to look at this and say, God's brought us this far. and he's going to continue to lead us. So as I looked over the congregation that last Sunday, they had wonderful things to share with us. Beautiful words, a lot of appreciation that we don't deserve but loved hearing. I thought about how so much had changed in this almost 8 years we've been there, and definitely over the 10 years the work's been going. How there were so many Sundays when there were more Americans than Ukrainians. How there were so many Sundays when there was almost nobody at all. Sundays when I would stand up at the beginning of worship and not sit down till the closing prayer because there was nobody at all. There was nobody to help. So many days when I wasn't sure we were doing or accomplishing anything. When it felt like every day was one step forward and then 22 steps back. But as I spoke that last day and I looked out at the church of our regular 30 to 40 people on a Sunday, I realized that this church, this congregation in the center of Kharkiv, Ukraine, is that stone of help for me, is a stone of help for me. Something that says, God has brought us this far. In all of these years where we were questioning, all the days we didn't know what was going on, look what he did. And if ever you were doubting or not sure about what's next, look what he did and remind yourself that he's brought us this far, he will continue to lead us. And it was a beautiful and very emotional day for me. 3 days later, we woke up too early to our empty apartment and made our way to the train station to head to Kyiv, get on a plane to come to the States. It's been quite a journey, one we couldn't have taken without the partnership we have with this church. In the last 8 years, I've learned a lot about who I am and about what I believe. I've been pushed in ways I wouldn't have anticipated, and I've pushed in ways I wouldn't have anticipated. But through it all, God was faithful. And so our plan from here, we'll be in the States until July of this year. We'll be mainly based down in Broken Arrow with our primary sponsors. We'll be working with that church, and I'll be preparing for my first classes I'll be teaching this fall. We'll move to Kyiv in July, find an apartment, go to Kharkiv, pick up our stuff, and then the beginning of August, the new school year starts. This church has been an important partner in this work, and from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for the last 8 years. And I hope 8 years from now, I'll have a new story to share about the amazing things that God does. And so as I close tonight, I just want to challenge you with what challenged me, thinking about this Ebenezer, this stone of help, this idea that God has brought us this far, this idea of a physical thing which reminds us of God's spiritual involvement, presence in our lives. Ask yourself, ask your family, talk about it. What are some stones of help in your life? What are those physical things you can look at, or who are those physical people you can look at and say, you are proof that God has brought us this far? That when I'm not sure what's going to happen next, you are proof. For me, one of those things is my son. After 9 years of infertility, not knowing why all that was happening, not knowing why God wasn't answering that prayer, and then walking into the room and meeting him and realizing this is why. And I'd wait another 9 years to get him again. He's a reminder of an answered prayer when those days come and I just don't understand where's God or what's happening. He's one of those Ebenezers, one of those stones of help for me. So challenge yourself. What are those? Who are those people? And if you don't have them, maybe get practical about it. What are some things you can set up in your life? There's some good principles in the Old Testament about physical things to remind us of our mighty spiritual God. I think as Christians, though, there's no better rock of help or stone of help to look at than the physical cross. To look at the whole story of the Bible and to look at that cross and say, God brought us this far, he's surely going to carry us on to the end. And it's the ultimate sign of hope, the ultimate story to tell, to share to people. When was the last time you leaned on that rock? You reminded yourself of its amazing story. Or if you're not a Christian, maybe you don't understand that story. There are a lot of people here that would like to share it with you, who believe in the amazing story of Jesus and the hope that that stone of a piece of wood of help, what that means to us. Right now, this church has a time to sing a song together and to invite anybody up who has a need, something on their hearts, something that maybe touched you in what I said today, or maybe just questions you have about this Jesus, about this rock we have in our life that gets us through every day and will get us through eternity. If you have anything you would like to share, we're going to stand right now, sing together, come forward as we sing.
There's a fountain free